For more on what the reforms mean for China's economy, I spoke to Joseph Foudy, as promised, economics professor at New York University, and I asked him about the time frame in getting this done.
Yeah, I mean, first thing, it's important to note, this is a very long-term enterprise for China. They started SOE reforms in the 1990s, shed something like 25 million jobs. So this is not something really for 2015, but something we'll see moving forward. The government's target really is for 2020. What they can do now is to start to put discipline on managers, and that's why they're trying to increase the amount of shares in Chinese SOEs that are publicly traded. They think they can use that as a tool to sort of influence managers to focus on profitability and to be more efficient with their asset use. And so everything they do on that side is going to be very handy for the Chinese economy.
Is that just a nice way of saying that we have to fire a lot of people that basically aren't doing their jobs?
In the long run, it's going to mean employment reductions, and not because people aren't doing their jobs, but because if you're more efficient, you need fewer workers. If you substitute technology for people, you just need less of them. And in fact, in a modern economy, we would say, you know, the higher the output per worker, the better. And for China, that's absolutely true as well. The only issue is that with China slowing down a bit in 2015, job losses are more sensitive. But any job losses today would pale in comparison to the kind of restructuring in the 1990s. We're not talking about a massive soul-searching dislocation. We're talking about a 5 to 10-year project of steady attrition.
So we have precedents that's been set. I mean, my history doesn't go back for decades. It goes back probably for a decade or so, or a decade and a half. And I guess specifically, I'm thinking of the banking system in China. They weren't that efficient. They merged a bunch of the banks together. Then they wrote off all the bad loans. They became public companies for the most part, and they're sort of, yes, they are influenced, I suppose, by the government, at least regulated by the government, but they more or less operate on a for-profit model. Is that enough precedence that could we take that model and apply it to other industries?
Yeah, I mean, the real question is when the managers of these companies make decisions, what do they feel pressure about? And if the pressure is to sort of maximize employment or you know, for local projects that make local officials happy, that's bad. If they are focused on efficiency, that's good. And I should say it doesn't require bigger companies. There's some talk of merging companies, but it's really what are the underlying incentives of the managers? That's what's key.
You are a professor of economics, so you should understand this better than anybody. State-owned versus privately capitalized organizations that are for-profit. There is a significant cultural difference just among those two ideologies. How are they going to merge those together and keep everybody happy?
Yeah, it's going to be a steady process of changing the way managers view their decisions. And there's precedents across Asia. There's precedents within China, to be honest. But first, I think Singapore is the obvious model of a case where the government retains a significant ownership stakes in companies, but manages their companies as portfolios and expects every CEO to deliver results. But within China, if you look at the SOEs, for instance, in the auto industry, who have to compete with global players every day, they have joint ventures with U.S. firms, you see SOEs that act a lot like private companies. So it can absolutely be done. The question is there a market discipline forcing companies to operate more efficiently? Is there discipline on top managers? And part of the story, actually going back to the banking sector, is as long as there's cheap capital in China, companies will probably borrow too much, and they won't feel the sort of pressure to be more competitive because they always know there's more money available.
What about the issue of capital investment? Many of these factories, they're not the high-tech robotic factories that you would think of when we watch the videos of this stuff. They're significantly older. They're not as efficient. So it's not just the people aspect. It's also the capital expenditures that need to be done in order to make the factory physically more efficient as well. Where is that money going to come from?
Well, historically, the irony is that these companies have had ready access to cheap capital from the Chinese banking system, which historically has sent a lot of money to SOEs. They just haven't had any kind of real pressure to use it efficiently. And so if they take the money they're receiving now but use it in a more disciplined manner, they actually should be fine. What's difficult is that in any given year, you know, you kind of have an incentive to maximize employment and hire more people, even though we know in the long run, a healthy economy is getting more output out of fewer people and just having faith that the market will reemploy those people over time.
One of the things that the Chinese government has attempted to do in some way, shape, or form is get more foreign investment involved in the helping of re-energizing and making state-owned enterprises more efficient. And I'm wondering from you, what's the response you hear from private companies when they're approached on such initiatives?
Well, I think private companies, we now have a very long history in China. A number are always very cautious because you're dealing with a partner that's, closely tied to the government. But there's been a number of success stories as well. I mean, I think ultimately they ask the same question I asked before, which is, what do you think at the end of the day is the incentive that, the CEO of a Chinese state-owned enterprise is facing? And if you think they're fearful of shareholders, they're fearful of getting enough profits to please the government, if you think they're worried about market competition, any or all of those can induce companies to be more competitive. But if they feel sheltered and protected, that's where you're going to face an issue.
I
One other point is there's always some percentage of companies, particularly probably in the industrial Northeast in China, that are probably just weaker than anywhere else. And you just have to look at what are some of the ailing companies that over time you're just going to have to slowly and humanely shut down. But that's not necessarily the majority of SOEs across the country. There's a lot of real nuggets of companies that one day could become world class.